Hello, friends. I'm Mrs. Hood, and welcome to Teachers of All Kinds. TAC is a podcast where teachers can benefit one another by sharing our unique experiences as individuals who also happen to be teachers. My guest for this episode of the podcast is Dr. JaNay Brown-Wood, an award-winning author and educator. She completed her PhD from the School of Education at UC Davis and is a professor at California State University, Sacramento. You can connect with her at JaNayBrownWood.com and find her on Facebook or Twitter. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope you do too. And now on to episode 13. All right, I'm here with Dr. JaNay Brown-Wood. Hi, JaNay, how are you?
Hi, I'm well. I'm hanging in there. How about you?
Good, thanks. So, first of all, you're a college professor in the education department at a major school in Sacramento, California. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, in the College of Education, and the department is Child and Adolescent Development.
Oh, okay, cool. And you guys are all online right now, right?
We are, at least in my department, we're pretty much 100% virtual. I know all my classes are.
What classes are you teaching this year or right now?
So currently I'm teaching language development, and I'm also teaching our curriculum class. It has a longer title. It's curriculum methods and developmental experiences. So those are the two classes I'm teaching right now.
Oh, cool. And what is language development, and how does it relate to education?
Oh, that, Angie, is like a 3-hour long worth of information. But what I will say is language development is really just exploring how children develop this communication tool of language to communicate and convey meanings and messages with others. It's incredibly important in really just beyond education in all contexts, because communication, right, is important.
Right.
But one of the reasons why I am drawn to language is because I have such a passion for early literacy. So these skills needed to allow for children to read, write, and spell. And language skills sets the foundation for literacy, right? Language, this is something that happens authentically when children are being engaged in environments that are seeped with language. Whereas literacy, you actually have to build those skills. But again, you build those skills on the language foundation. So I think that's one of the reasons why language is important. Of course, there's countless others too, but that's especially how language resonates with me.
And the other class was curriculum?
Yeah, developmental experiences and methods.
And so you mostly focus on early childhood education? Is that your main kind of focus of research and teaching?
It is, early childhood education, which really spans from birth to 8 years old, although you could argue, prenatal is just as important. So before birth, prenatal through age 8.
And age 8, that's like 3rd grade. So prenatal to about 3rd grade. Okay. Yeah. I was thinking early child education was like birth to preschool. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Generally, that's the focus, right? To age 5-ish, but really age 8 is included in this whole spectrum. So when you think of early elementary school, often that could fall under, again, that definition of or at least a range of ECE.
Okay. And when I was thinking about this and writing questions for you, and I was thinking how ECE was mostly birth to preschool, my previous misconception, I was going to ask, is it becoming more accessible financially for parents, things like preschool and other early experiences? Because I know when I was a kid, my parents had to pay for, pre-public school education, such as preschool.
I would say it really depends where you are, but I do think from my understanding and from what I've heard, and even from my own experiences, that childcare and some of those programs could be pretty pricey. They could be
Yeah.
difficult to pay for, especially if you're looking for some of those very high quality programs.
Mm-hmm.
However, depending on where you are, there are different resources in the community that can help with that. I do know that, you know, there's some work that's being done with transitional kindergarten and those sorts of things. So it really depends.
Mm-hmm. What's
It really depends.
transitional kindergarten?
This is kind of, it's considered TK, and I'm going to explain it from my own understanding, and I might not have the best definition of it, but it's really this bridge between preschool and kindergarten, where maybe children would benefit from having a little bit more school experiences before going into a kindergarten program.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes, from my understanding, TK could be credentialed teachers who are teaching this, as opposed to an ECE, you know, preschool teacher. But it really is this idea of allowing for more kids to get some of that early experience before jumping right into kindergarten. That's my understanding of TK.
That seems important. I mean, I've heard horror stories, of course, of kids starting kindergarten and it just being so different, you know?
Yeah.
Also, I was wondering, you had mentioned hands-on learning across the ages. Why do you think hands-on learning kind of happens less in older grades, and is that a negative phenomenon?
I don't want to necessarily say it happens less. I think it depends on the school. It depends on the
Mhm.
teacher's philosophy. It depends on some of the other requirements. And also, you know, depending on where your learners are, sometimes there's a shift. And the shift allows for you to use different sorts of methods. Here's what I mean. For example, we know that as children age, their attention spans expand and they get better at being able to pay attention for longer amounts of time.
Mhm.
So for a child who's much older who can then sit and hear, I don't know, a lecture or something like that,
Mhm.
it's more likely to be effective for them because they're older, right? And so then that allows for the teacher to be able to teach some of these other concepts in that way.
Mhm.
But that's not to say, though, that there isn't space for hands-on learning, too.
Mhm.
I can give you an example like project-based approaches where in high schools, students can come up with like these ideas that they want to explore, and then this can hit on standards. It can align with standards and the same sorts of things that they need to be learning, right? And it allows for them to get that hands-on experience in a meaningful way because they're sort of guiding what they're exploring. I don't know if you understand what I mean by that.
Like student choice being kind of a...
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'll give you a concrete example from my own experience.
Sure.
Before I was an professor, I worked with a school district.
Mhm.
And one of the things we did every summer, it was called the Summer of Service.
Mhm.
And the kids, these are high school kids, and middle school as well, actually, but the kids got to think about issues within their community, brainstorm them, capture them on the board, thinking about things that, you know, impact them and their lives and that were important to them. And then picked a specific one, thought about the roots, like why is this issue in our community, and started to brainstorm solutions and ways to positively affect that issue. And so think about, for example, some of the standards that could be met with that: speaking and listening, having to read informational text based on maybe their issue was homelessness. And so now to get a better idea of homelessness, the kids had to research and look up, well, what is homelessness? What are things that cause it, et cetera. So while they picked, in this example, homelessness, because it was something that mattered to them, they were guiding their own learning, but it still aligned to important skills that they needed, you know, important academic skills that they needed. So that's hands-on learning. And there's, in my opinion, I believe that there is space for that throughout the ages.
So hands-on learning.
Yeah.
So hands-on learning for you can mean not just working with your hands, but having a real life tangible connection to the learning, to the content, a real passion for it.
Yeah. Yeah. When I think of hands-on learning, I think that there are concepts that are embedded in what you're learning, but you are building experiences with it. It's different. Let me give you an example. Say you're trying to teach the concept of blue, the color blue, right? It's one thing to stand up and write the word blue on the board and say, this is blue. It's like the sky. It's like the, versus we're going to talk about the color blue. And in one center, you've got different paints that are shades of blue that the kids can then engage with, right? And then you've got other things all surrounding this idea of blue, but they're playing with it. They're practicing with it. And so this is going to build this scheme of blue for them. And it connects so many different domains, right? They're having this emotional connection as they're like, and sensory connection as they're touching and playing with it. Maybe, I mean, you know, there's so many different things that you could do. You're still learning this concept of blue, but you're doing it in this very meaningful, engaging way. That's what I think of as hands-on learning, taking those concepts, but setting up opportunities so that learners can make that information theirs, as opposed to just like memorizing a concept.
Right. That makes sense. Like student-led learning and student-directed experiences and more, you know, engaging with the content. And that ECE sounds amazing. As a high school math teacher with curriculum restrictions and you have to teach, you know, polynomials in a week or whatever, it's really seems more difficult perhaps to allow students the kind of choice and hands-on learning that is available or more accessible with early childhood education, perhaps.
I mean, and I've never taught high school or anything like that, and I understand that there are this range of standards and requirements and all of that. But then sometimes, you know, the teacher, I don't know, sometimes like stepping back and thinking creatively, if this is what I'm trying, like if you boil down to this is the objective, this is what I'm trying to teach the kids, then being creative and like, well, I can do that with worksheets, but perhaps I could do it with this thing, like manipulatives, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it allows for some creativity on the teacher's part. But I mean, that goes back to what I was saying, trying to find some space in there, but doing it in a realistic way, trying to find some space in your classroom, your curriculum, your day to allow for hands-on learning, but doing it in a way that's realistic to you, right? Some school districts, some classrooms might have more space for it than others. And so I do think that it's, you have to adjust it to meet your objectives, your goals, your needs.
Isn't that so odd and polarizing that everything depends on what district you're a part of, like what state you're in or what town you're in? And some places have more libraries and some places have no libraries. And we're just
you're hitting on a really important issue, right? Some of this around equity and resources, and you're absolutely right that some places have more than others. And that, to me, that's a larger conversation, you know, a larger conversation about what we can do as a nation or overall to provide or to allow for these sort of quality learning experiences, quality learning environments across the board.
Right.
Yeah. I don't have all the answers to that.
No one does. No one does.
Right. Yeah, but it's good to think about and try to.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like one of the few possibly benefits of coronavirus and everything going online is more resources are being put online so that people, at least people with access to internet, have even
Right.
more access to different resources for different content and different experiences. But of course, some people don't have reliable internet. A lot of people.
But that's a big piece,
Yes.
right? That's a big piece. And I don't know. I feel like it's give and take. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Going online, right? You do have like all of these, I don't know, webinars, et cetera, at your fingertips. But that social interaction beyond a screen,
right,
lacking, it's missing.
Oh,
and
yes.
kids need that. I just think of my daughter. She's 3 years old. And she's an only child at this point. And, you know, she has an 8-year-old cousin, but she's just missing that social interaction. That's so important. So I guess what I'm saying is, yeah, the virtual space, it's got its goods and it's not so good.
Oh, definitely. Definitely more not so goods, right? But I was just thinking about that, and I also wanted to go back to what you said about spelling and literacy and writing, and when we were talking about your language class. I have a friend who was so irate that her kid's teacher was making her child in kindergarten with this virtual learning. She was wanting her kindergartner to write sentences without knowing how to spell the words. Just write sentences. Just practice writing sentences. And the mother, my friend, was very frustrated because her child would say, "But I don't know how to spell any of the words. How am I supposed to write sentences, Mom?" And she agreed with her and thought spelling should come first. But I don't know if I agree. I don't know anything about it, of course, but I was going to ask what you thought.
Oh, that's complex.
Yeah, I would imagine.
That's complex. My understanding when it comes to all of these pieces that they are all intertwined, right? They're all intertwined. And when you think about literacy instruction, which includes reading, but it includes writing and spelling as well, is research suggests that it needs to be done in a systematic way. And looking at like, it should be systematic and sequential, building on these different skills and doing it in a way that is sort of unlocking some of the patterns within, in our case, the English language, and then scaffolding it in a way that children are challenged, but not necessarily beyond their frustration level. So I'm not, you won't hear me evaluating or placing judgment on any teachers. Because personally, I feel like hats off to all teachers. Thank you so much for what you do, especially right now during this pandemic. But you know, from my own understanding, in many cases, teachers aren't necessarily getting the full explanation or knowledge base on how to teach reading, on how to teach spelling. And because of that, teachers use what they know, right? And so sometimes missing those important background knowledge pieces or skills makes it difficult for a teacher to know specifically, well, what am I supposed to do? They need to be writing. I need to, but I you know, and so that's why I'm saying it's complex.
Sorry to butt in, but I had a previous guest who said she was never taught how to teach reading. She had to Google it, and then she started learning how to teach reading, even though she already had an education degree. Her professors or her classes never provided enough information on how to teach it.
It's real. And I'm not going to even get into some of the conflict that I'm learning about that's inherent in teaching instruction and philosophies about it and what should be used, what shouldn't be used. But it's tense. It's
Wow.
definitely tense. And it's kind of heartbreaking that there's this tension, especially when looking at some of the evidence pooled from decades of literacy instruction research, that, there are some research suggests that there are some ways to do this, and focusing on some of these other skills that maybe some individuals don't think is as necessary. That research really suggests that there's this way to do it, and not everyone agrees with that, and because of that, then you might have individuals who are teaching, of course, based on their own philosophy. Which again, I'm not bad mouthing anyone, but that might mean that a teacher might not get this a pre-teacher, right? A teacher in a credential program might not get this piece that might have been exactly what they needed to help them teach kids how to break a code. We're talking about like breaking a code,
right,
so that they can comprehend written text and produce their own.
Yes, and it reminds me of in mathematics, there's historically this huge dichotomy between drill and kill, just lecture and have them practice on worksheets, and then there's this, hands-on, discover their learning, discover the pattern between the numbers, talk about it, engage with it. There's these two camps.
Yeah.
Very polarizing, and research shows this one is better, right?
Yeah.
But still there's a lot of people in this camp, for whatever reason, either because of their personal beliefs, but also because of their abilities. Some teachers don't know how to facilitate more hands-on learning. They've never been taught how to be that kind of teacher. So they fall back on lecture and worksheets.
Yeah. No, I mean, it sounds very similar to what's happening sort of in reading instruction. And that's why I myself am doing what I can to learn more and more, because, I don't like the term expert. I just don't like the term. I just feel like everyone always has more to learn.
Right.
And while I have a knowledge base, I still have so much more to learn. That's really how I look at learning. And even as a professor, I do not know everything. Of course not, right? But myself trying to learn more and more about these things so that I can make sure in my classroom, I'm providing that for my students. Because I want them to have that important information, especially related to direct application within the classroom. And that, to me, again, that goes back to some of that hands-on learning. I might lecture on these concepts and introduce them to you, but then I try to set up activities where now they're, again, getting the hands-on practice, application of the concepts, identification of the concepts, describing it, because to me, that's what's important, to help them internalize it. So even when it comes to literacy and me learning so much myself, me trying to make sure that I'm getting that information to my students too. So that way, for those who do end up in the classroom, they don't feel like they're hearing some of the stuff for the first time. They'll already have had some practice with it, and then know how to start engaging their children.
Definitely.
Oh, maybe it's a lofty goal, but I'm going to keep working at it.
One of my professors in the teaching program, well, he was actually a math professor, but he said you don't start learning about teaching until you start teaching. I said at this school, yeah. But no, but it's interesting how little I was required to be in the classroom when I was getting my credential. I had a couple weeks of observing a classroom and then right into my student teaching for a semester, and that was it.
Yeah.
But I was going to ask you, with Common Core mathematics, we have standards, But then we also have math practices like behaviors and skills students should build, like perseverance, like
Hmm.
using tools appropriately. Is there something like that with ELA standards?
I'm not the best one to answer
Okay.
that because I don't have as much depth of knowledge with relation to ELA
Okay.
standards, especially in sort of K-12.
Mm-hmm.
What I can say in ECE is there's these sort of foundations,
Mm-hmm.
and there's also actually work that's being done in some of these areas too, especially pertaining to teachers and the skills teachers need
Mm-hmm.
to help them then be able to promote these quality learning environments. So I do know, like I'm saying, in ECE, there are those foundations, and from that, teachers can start to build some objectives, or at least tie their objectives to those,
Mm-hmm.
to ensure that they're, like I said, providing quality environments.
I see. Okay.
Mhm.
And you had started out with a bachelor's in psychology and applied developmental psychology. Was there a specific moment or impetus that made you decide to get a PhD in education? I know you had a master's between those degrees.
Mm-hmm.
Was there kind of a trajectory, something that caused that trajectory?
Yeah. And anyone who's heard my story has heard this story. Well, first of all, let me just say that my aunt, Annette, we call her Nettie, she had, and still does, have a family child care program where
Mm,
she kept children in her home and she taught children. And I actually went there myself.
cool.
And so I went there as a kid, but then I went back as a teenager to, help. It probably was just me being babysat as a teenager, but, them disguising it as like, yeah, you're helping. But anyway, from there, I got to see, young children and interact with young children. And I realized I had some interest. I was like, this is kind of cool.
Mm,
Then I remember in high school, I took a psychology class,
mhm,
and learning more about sort of the human psyche and all those sorts of things also was like, this is kind of cool.
mhm.
So when I got into UCLA, I actually I was a psychology major, and I was a psychology major all the way through, which I feel like, doesn't always happen. Students are like, I don't know what I want to do. And then they determine. But I came in knowing I had an interest in psychology, kind of realizing I had an interest with kids too. So I
Mm,
was taking these psychology classes. And I remember this one specific class. It was a cultures class. And it was Dr. Greenfield, I think her name was. And she had introduced this concept that I had never heard of before. It was the academic achievement gap. And I was like,
mm,
what? What do you mean, black and brown kids are trailing, white and possibly Asian students when it comes to reading and writing? What do you, and math? What do you mean by that? And I think that was the impetus for me, because it
oh,
was mind-boggling. Like, how? Why? I remember, being undergrad and being like, that doesn't make sense. What is the reason?
mhm,
And that solidified sort of my interest in early childhood education,
mm,
because then I started thinking about, well, to me, this stuff starts early. It's
yeah,
early. Even as an undergrad, I remember thinking like, well, it starts early.
mhm,
And so I remember as an undergrad, I did a student research study where I was looking at baby sign is what it was, sign language being used with young children, because I started thinking about like, well, what are some tools? What are some strategies? What are some things that can be used early on that can help support later academic achievement, basically?
mm,
And, can those sorts of things be used in my community to
uh-huh,
help support, children from diverse backgrounds?
uh-huh,
So I feel like that class was the one that really opened my eyes to it. Then
mm,
I started getting more and more experiences working with young children in
mm,
preschool settings, infant, toddler, also in out of school time programs or expanded learning programs like summer summer camps and summer programs and all those sorts of things. And so when my husband and I moved up to Sacramento, the first job I got up here was as a toddler teacher. And I love toddlers. And I was getting more and more experience. I was watching their language development. I remember being told at the school that I worked at, because I worked with, like I said, infant toddlers, and I talked to them so much because I had learned the importance of talking to kids and reading to them so much. And I remember the director coming in and hearing my little toddlers talking, and she was blown away. She was like, this is the most I have ever heard toddlers in this class talking. And so those are all sort of pieces that continue to push me in this direction. But then, I don't know, being reflective, it was the literacy piece that sort of emerged out of all of that. To me, that was like, that's it. That's my calling. That's where I'm supposed to be. Because I just think about if students, to be productive, to be successful in our current, society,
right?
Strong literacy skills are important. They're important in school. They're important outside of school once you start to pursue careers. They're so important. And then when you look at things like the NAEP scores and you see how poorly students are doing with relation to literacy and reading skills, that continue to push me in this direction. And I feel like I try to address it from multiple angles.
Yeah.
I address it as this person who's sort of ECE trained, right? And thinking about the importance of setting strong brain neurological networks related to, again, early language exposure, hands-on experiences, those things that help to bridge or build these really important neural networks. So me taking that and teaching others, teaching students, teaching people who have an interest in working with children, whether they're there because they're parents themselves or because they want to work with children in a community, maybe not an educational setting, but in the community, or they want to be teachers, right? So that's one way that I try to address it, teaching these important concepts related to child development, to literacy, to language. But I also do it as a researcher, looking into, right now my focus is the lack of diversity in children's books and how that might have a connection to literacy skills with things like preference for reading certain types of books, or maybe later exploring motivation related to that. And then as a children's author, right? Writing books, trying to write diverse books that engage children. One, because the story is fun. Two, because the language is fun. But three, because they see themselves in those books. So that is a very long answer to your question of what the impetus was. But I think that's great. All of these pieces kind of came together and have sort of led me to where I am today. And, Angie, to be honest, I feel like I'm just getting started.
Right?
Just getting started.
Nice. And I do want to talk about your published works next, but before we get to that, you made me think of how students are trailing behind in literacy. And it made me think of how, in math, they're also trailing behind in basic numeracy skills. And then I have people telling me, oh, we have calculators. We don't need to know these rules. And then that made me think of there's audiobooks, so you don't need to know how to read. It's that same terrible argument, right? But audiobooks, just like calculators, are a great tool. They're a great resource, but they don't in any way replace the skill, of course, right?
Why not use both? And here's my thought, especially when we're talking about very young children. I feel like there's benefit in teaching them the basic skills in those things. Teaching them the basic skills, building the important neurological connections, starting there. And then maybe introducing some of those other things. But that way they can decide whether they want to use that tool or come up with that mathematical solution in their mind, right? Because they were taught how to do that. Or, I don't know, like, say that one more time.
They have the freedom to choose.
You know, I was having a really interesting conversation in this training that I'm taking related to literacy skills. And we were talking about spelling in cursive, right? And well, there's typing. You know, there's typing. Do you think there's still value in teaching things like handwriting and cursive? And we were all of the same mind, like, absolutely, absolutely, there's still value. Again, if we're thinking about it at sort of the neural network level, there's absolutely value in that.
It strengthens the brain.
Yeah, so
that's one benefit, not the only benefit.
Right. Yeah, but that's not to say no audiobooks.
Right.
I think, you got to look at your own life. You got to look at your own values and all of that and make that decision yourself. But if I were to say for myself, with audiobooks, if you think about it at the language level, you're hearing language. There's language if you're hearing. Now, from my understanding with some research studies, there's even with language and communication, for example, that it seems that face-to-face actual interactions with an individual has a stronger benefit than like putting the kid in front of a screen and having them do it that way.
Makes sense to me.
But again, I just feel like my job as an educator, as an advocate, all of that is to inform. I want to tell you. I want to tell you best practices. I want to tell you what research says. I want to show you, like, look, this is data. But ultimately, it's the teacher, parent, et cetera's decision to make the choices that they think are best for their learners and for their children. But like I said, I want to make sure, though, I am adding to their knowledge base so that they can make informed choices.
Right.
Whether or not they want to use that audiobook or the calculator or et cetera.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you're a published author.
I am.
And do you want to show us or tell us a little bit about your books?
Yeah, sure. So you can see their lovely covers behind me there.
Wonderful.
So currently I have 2 out. Grandma's Tiny House and Imani's Moon. Imani's Moon was my first published book. And it's really a story about perseverance, and it's got some great other concepts inherent in it, like bullying I think it allows for having conversations with children about bullying and then brainstorming ways to thwart it, right? If you see someone doing those sorts of things, what can you do? But it's also a story about perseverance and overcoming obstacles, even ones that seem impossible, right? I wrote the story, tried to write it sort of in the vein of a folk tale. So it's sort of like a magical folk tale, but that, again, you can learn something from. So that's Imani's Moon. Grandma's Tiny House it's a counting story. We were just talking about math, right? And, math is near and dear to your heart. You teach it.
Right.
But it's a counting story, and it counts up to 15, which I feel like so often when you see picture books and that sort of thing, you don't generally see 15. You might see 10, or you might see maybe 20. But I was intentional that I wanted it to go up to 15 because I think so often some of those funky numbers like 11, 12 that don't really match those other patterns, it can be challenging. So I wanted this book to include up to 15 so that kids can practice with that, could see that in a fun way. But it also rhymes, which I'm a rhymer, Angie. I'm a rhymer. Imani's doesn't rhyme, but I'm a rhymer, and I love language, and I love playing with language, and rhyme allows you to be so playful with it. But it's also important because here I am with the literacy hat. I can't get away from it. Phonological awareness, right? Having awareness of the sounds in language and being able to manipulate these different sounds within language. Rhyming goes hand in hand with that. A child being able to rhyme, and you tell them, what's a word that rhymes with cat? And that they can say bat or that. That's phonological awareness, right? That awareness of the sounds of language and being able to manipulate them. So anyway, Grandma's Tiny House is a great teaching tool that can be used for that because it rhymes. So those are the two that I have out. And I don't think you can see that, but this is actually a poetry anthology that I'm a part of. I don't know if you can see my name right there.
Oh, cool.
Boom, there I am. Yeah, so this book is called Thank You, Poems of Gratitude. And it's just this beautiful poetry anthology with a whole host of wonderful, diverse poets. And it's about being thankful. And I love it because it's about being thankful about lots of different things. My poem is about leaves.
It's called Falling Leaves, right?
It is, yeah. Being thankful for the trees that grew those leaves that, allow for me to have these beautiful experiences with them. So those are the three that are out, but Angie, I've got a ton more, and actually more and more and more are being added to this list of books coming out. But as of right now, I have signed contracts for, I think we are at 8.
Wow.
New books coming out between now and 2023.
Congratulations.
Thank you. My fabulous agent we're in the works for some other stuff that I can't talk about right now, but
that's okay.
but so lots of opportunities to engage. Thank you. To engage readers in books. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think I read you feel like you've always been a writer.
Yeah.
So between writing and educating, I guess you don't have to separate them, but for me, I used to think of myself as more writer than educator. And these days it's the opposite. For whatever reason, maybe because of the path my life took or what I, am used to doing day to day, what I've invested in. For you, what do you feel is calling to more these days, or is it inseparable?
You are asking me to pick my favorite child, Angie. That's what you're asking right now. That's so tough. It's so tough to say because it goes back to what I was saying. I just feel like all of my passions have melded together and interact. And what I can say about writing is I cannot go without it. There are times when, I get so busy and I miss writing and I can feel like I need to be creative. I need to get some words down. And so sometimes for that, I might just jot down some words in a poem, for example. But it's difficult to separate that from the educator because I also, there's this idea of disguised learning, right? That maybe a child doesn't even realize they're learning, but you set up the environment or you set up the activity or experience in such a good way, such a strong, intentional way that they are learning, right? And I think of Grandma's Tiny House, that's a great example of it. It's a narrative. It's a whole story. But, yep, you're getting some practice with those numbers too. So that's what I mean by making it difficult to separate the two, because through my writings, I also think that there are opportunities to teach.
I see.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. And I love, by the way, I don't know how much you know about this, but in the history of math, there's people that have had different systems of numbers that have not been based on tens. So I love that you go to 15 because I think it challenges a child's brain to think about 15 being the cap or the I don't know what word is right, but there's been other people who have different words for 1 through 20 and then base their higher numbers off of 20, or they might do another one is 12 base 12, so that at 12 it would be 1, 0. Whatever the next symbol for 1 and 0 are, it would go to 2 digits at 12. A bundle of 12 would be 10. So I loved my history of math class when I took it. But anyways, so I thought that was interesting because we're so wrapped up in base 10 in our society, and people don't realize that other bases exist. So 15 just kind of made me think of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it.
So I also read on your website you're a big fan of Harry Potter.
I am.
And I was reading about J.K. Rowling's new book, Ickabog. And what interested me about her new book is that it features illustrations from children from around the world.
Oh, cool.
Did you know that?
I haven't had a chance. So right now, since I'm in my second year as an assistant professor, leisure reading, it's kind of a thing of the past right now, but hopefully a thing of the future too.
Right.
So I haven't had a chance to engage in some of those things, but I do remember, I think at one point on Twitter, she was posting some of children's artwork. So that doesn't surprise me that she might include something like that in a book.
Yeah, and it made me think about student choice, just to go back to that a little bit, where we involve our audience, or as teachers, we involve our students sometimes in the creation of our lessons, just like you were saying about hands-on learning. So we kind of already talked about that, but it was really interesting to me that she involved her audience in the creation of her book, you know?
Yeah.
So this is funny because we already talked about it, but I had this idea about it with the Harry Potter book. But how important do you think it is to include student choice in creating lessons? I know we talked about hands-on learning, but with like, for example, higher up math or science, we have to cover certain concepts. And I guess you can try to make it around something like homelessness. There are math functions you could do that describe the statistics of homelessness, for example. And I just struggle with, you know, how else can I include more about the real world with math?
Yeah.
It's just statistics or, you know, maybe, I don't know.
I have a confession for you, Angie. Math and I really are not good friends. Math and I, we just, you know, kind of have a love-hate relationship. But I bring that up facetiously because from just some of the engagement, especially some of the newer engagements that I'm a part of, conversations I'm a part of, just being reminded that math is everywhere. That basically math in everything. And this goes back to what I was saying before, teachers having to be creative, having to think outside of the box to incorporate some of those opportunities in the classroom. So I think that really sitting down and again, thinking about like your objective. What are you hoping that the students walk away with? And then starting to think outside of the box sometimes, like, well, yeah, there is some math in that. You talked about statistics, right? For like the example of homelessness. But why not having some discussions about area in the city? Like in this, you know, square miles, I'm not gonna even pretend like I have all the terminology for math, but in this square mile, you know, perimeter, how many individuals? So things like that, proportions, ratios. So and I mean, sometimes going back to asking the students, why not ask them, what other math do you think is a part of this discussion about homelessness? Maybe that'll lead you to discussions about wealth gap, right? And income and that kind of stuff. Maybe it'll, I don't know, lead you to discussions about, you just never know. And so sometimes when you turn that back on the students, I'm not even say sometimes, often they surprise you.
Mhm.
So being open to that, but then again, being creative
Mhm.
and being savvy so
Mhm.
that you can make sure you can tie those standards to it.
Right.
Or maybe you need to tweak something in that conversation just a little bit more so now that it aligns. Now, again, I'm gonna just say these are ideas that I've heard of or ideas
Sure.
that I thought of too. I'm not a K-12 teacher. And I
Sure.
do think sometimes you might look at me and be like, well, that's lofty, JaNay.
Oh, no.
You don't have the assessment in 2 weeks or whatever. But I do, then I push back a little bit and I'm like, well, teaching is challenging.
Mhm.
They say teaching is a science, teaching is an art. I think it's
Mhm.
both of those.
Right.
Challenging. And so
Mhm.
part of our job is to be reflective and think about ways to improve. And I apply that to myself. I talk about hands-on learning and all of that, and I'm trying to improve my own pedagogy around that.
Mhm.
I know I like to lecture, and I like to, but even with my growth as an educator and as a professor, I'm trying to tweak that a little bit more. Like, can I take this piece that I'm lecturing about and maybe not lecture about it? Maybe set up an environment in my classroom where they're still going to walk away with that same knowledge, but
Right.
now they did it in their own way because I provided this environmental opportunity. So
Do you think some students, just the way they learn, benefit more from lecture and some students benefit more from a more interactive environment? Or does it
I,
depend?
it's interesting. It sounds like you're asking about learning styles.
Mhm.
And I'm not as familiar. I mean, I know of learning styles, but I'm pretty sure that there's some new research coming out questioning this idea of learning styles.
Mhm.
So I don't have a firm stance on this, but what I will say is that everyone is different. And I do think that, again, trying to be creative
Mhm.
and offering different media,
Right.
different mediums, different ways for students to engage and connect with the content
Mhm.
it's a good thing to do,
Yeah.
right? It allows for variety. And so then the hope is somewhere in there, you'll be able to capture the interest of all your students in the
Right.
way that you engage them.
Because some teachers say, interactive is the way to go, no lecture. But I think a little bit of lecture is good. There's times when lecture is the best way to deliver the content, especially in math. There's a lot of front loading. But
Sure.
it's funny how you said you have your relationship with math
Yeah.
is not the best.
Mm-mm.
It's so funny because I feel like people don't say that with reading. There's a stigma about math, and a lot of people have a bad relationship with math. And I feel like they're both very foundational skills, maybe literacy more than math. I'm not sure.
Well,
But
you do have to be able to read the numerals, right? You have
right,
to be, so
right.
there's,
True, true.
well, you know what I think though, Angie? Again, looking at NAEP scores,
Mhm.
looking at illiteracy scores, illiteracy data, I
Right.
think that what it tells me is that, I mean, I really appreciate what you're saying about, like, I can easily say, oh, math, ugh. But when it comes to lacking literacy skills, I think that that's more hidden. I
Mm,
do think that you might have
I
similar
see.
issues with literacy, but you're way less likely to say, I can't read or write, then you might be like, give me a calculator, do you know what I mean?
So there's actually
Um,
a stigma about having a bad relationship with literacy. People are less likely to reveal that. You
I
think?
just wonder. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know what any research said, but I mean, I think if an adult had a hard time reading,
Mm,
that's not going to be something they readily share with you.
that makes sense.
And I know I was reading something, they will probably, in some cases, exhibit some behaviors that allow them to avoid having to read,
Mhm.
or especially in public spaces.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
guess that's to say that I think to an extent they're there for both math and literacy, but perhaps the literacy piece, people aren't as forthright about that.
I haven't thought about that. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, you hear all the time, oh, I hate math. But that's maybe liberating, and it shows perhaps that people are more forthcoming, more open, they're able to be more open about their relationship with math. Whereas there's probably just as many people have trouble with literacy, but they're not feeling as safe to share that.
Perhaps.
Interesting. So, let's see. I also wanted to ask you, because we're getting close to wrapping up here.
Yeah, I do have to right at the hour.
Oh, you have to go right at the hour?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, I'll skip the last set of
Sorry.
questions. Go to a wrap-up question. No, you're fine. I was gonna. Let's go to the wrap-up questions then. What is one skill or quality of yourself? One of your skills or qualities that you're most proud of.
These questions are always so hard for me to answer. Because like I said, I feel like I'm always a work in progress.
Right.
Always, for everything. Just like I was saying, not loving the term expert, because I'm always a work in progress.
To me, expert means done learning.
Yeah, and I'm not even close, right? What I think my creativity. I keep talking about like, you gotta be creative. I actually think my creativity and sort of the ability to, divergent thinking, trying to think outside the box. And I especially have to use that with writing, right?
I love it.
Because it's like, you want to produce something new. That's not. So I would say my creativity, and that allows me, I'm able to use it in many different ways with my writing, as an educator, as an advocate, all these other things. So I think my creativity. Yeah.
What is one of your skills or qualities you plan to work on?
I just want to expand my knowledge base on a lot of these things. Literacy based, especially ways to help move that information into like the community in a strength-based type way, so that I'm offering some, again, like suggestions and all of that, but not making the community feel like, well, I do it all wrong, like I just, finding a way to help show, no, you have such strengths. I want to add to this, add to your arsenal of strengths by giving you some additional things to consider. So I think just expanding my knowledge base is something that I want to improve on, and just continue to be a better teacher and educator and researcher too.
Woo!
Yeah.
Well, JaNay, thank you so much for spending time talking with me today. It was a pleasure talking with you.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed this, Angie. And so thanks for reaching out to me. I really enjoyed this.
Thanks, and have a great day.
Okay, you too.
Bye. Your time is valuable. Thank you for spending some of it listening to teachers of all kinds. If you know anyone who would enjoy being a guest, send them my way. Thanks again, and have the best week. I'm Mrs. Hood, and I'll see you next time on TAC.